Next, you're going to hear from, I say again, activist attorney Michael Coard. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ramona, for that introduction, and thank you for being one of the most, if not the most, legitimate, genuine, serious revolutionaries I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. Let's give Ramona.
Long live John.
And I'm not going to speak too long. I'm just going to outline some of the things that I think are important. And I have to admit, I know that when it comes to revolutionary movements, not a whole bunch of black folks are really into it. We got to kind of enlighten them and move forward. But tonight I actually brought, as I said when I introduced Walt Palmer, Dr. Walt Palmer, I wrote an article for Philadelphia Magazine, and they were supposed to publish it today, 36 years from 1978, but for whatever reason it won't be published until Monday, and it'll be online. My point is, I didn't expect as many people to be here as are here tonight. I only brought 50 copies, and it's not enough for everybody, but I'm happy. I'm ecstatic that it's much more. Give yourselves a big round of applause. And I'm going to give the 50 to Ramona, and she'll distribute them to folks who really need it. And those who have access to the internet and email, you can just contact me and I'll make sure you get a copy. But let me start out by saying, and Ramona mentioned this at the beginning, when I come to programs like this, I'm usually introduced as a lawyer, but I'm glad that Ramona said what she said, because it's what I always say, which is, I am not a lawyer who happens to be a black man. Instead, I'm a black man who just happens to be a lawyer. For me, the law is a means to an end. And far too often when black folks and Latino folks and poor white folks are fortunate enough to get into law school, they buy into that. They actually believe that stuff. They actually believe it and they become that thing. But their oppression is the result of that thing. The struggle cannot begin and end with the law, and believe me, I appreciate what civil rights attorneys do because they serve a great purpose. But the problem with the law is that it's the law and it's made primarily by men. Racist men, classist men, bigoted men. In fact, if you think about it, slavery was the law. Women not being able to vote was the law. Apartheid was the law. So don't tell me what the law is, tell me what's right. Having said that, let me say this. I'm not a MOVE member, but when I look at MOVE, I have to say that MOVE is the most liberating organization I've ever heard of. They say and do what black people really want to say and really want to do, but don't because of fear. Can you imagine standing in front of a white racist cop and saying F you, right to his face, and mean it? When I represented some of the MOVE members a very long time ago right at law school, it was really interesting when we go into court and the judge would come in. Here I am thinking I'm this revolutionary lawyer, but every time the judge came in, I stood up. But the MOVE members didn't stand up. And I just stood there with amazed, absolutely amazed that they didn't care. And the system even stopped holding them in contempt because they didn't fear prison. A black man or a black woman who has no fear is a dangerous human being. And we need to have more of that. Ramona also touched on, and I'm going to get to my presentation in just a second, she touched on what I always say. I always tell people I've never lost a case in the 20 years I've been a lawyer. People say, well, how is that possible that you never lost a case? The reason is I define winning and losing differently. Most people define winning as a judge or a jury saying not guilty, and I get a lot of that. But for me, this is what I do. I don't go to court to get justice because there's very little there. I go to court to expose the injustice, which means I win every time I open up my mouth in the courtroom because it's all about showing people what's really going on. And what's really going on is Eric Garner and Amadou Diallo and Oscar Grant and Sean Bell and Eleanor Bumpers and Donta Dawson. And just recently when I saw the video of Eric Garner getting murdered. I mean, I see this all the time, and I hear this all the time, and I'm sure many of you saw the California highway patrolman who had the 51-year-old grandmother on the ground just punching her in the face like she was Mike Tyson. And when I see all that, I mean, I get angry, and I really get outraged, and I really want to do something, and I'm not really going to say what I want to do because I could get arrested for it. But I would hope that people go to my Facebook page, because it's really funny, people see me on the street and in court and radio, and they think I'm this really nice guy, and I'm pretty much this nice guy. But on Facebook, I'm not speaking for WRD, I'm not speaking for a client, I'm not speaking for anybody but myself, so I can just let loose and say exactly what I want to say. And in talking about Eric Garner and Sean Bell and Oscar Grant and all those people, I posted something on Facebook, and this is exactly what it said. It said, it's beginning to look like only clandestine, guerrilla-style retaliation will stop the oppression. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, this is what I'll tell you. When people ask me what does that mean, my answer, my grandfather used to tell me, those who know don't say, and those who say don't know. It's as simple as that. Let me jump right into what I came here to talk about. 36 years ago to the day, actually 36 years and 12 hours ago, at 8:15 a.m. on August 8, 1978, the Philadelphia Police Department showed what it really is. It showed the state oppression that it really is when it first tried to drown adults and babies in 6 feet of water. People don't realize that that basement was basically a swimming pool. 6 feet of water. And how much water was there? First of all, it was 4 fire department water cannons, and they put in a total of 250,000 gallons of water. Can you imagine that? 250,000 gallons of water. So here we are, August 8, 1978, 8:15 a.m., and at exactly that moment, one shot rang out. And as a result of that shot ringing out, police officer James Ramp was killed. Now we know, fast forward, that the Move 9 were charged and they were convicted. What people don't know are the facts about that case. First of all, the police department has a unit called the ballistics unit, and those are cops who are experts in firearms and ammo and all that. They said in their official report, this is not from the defense, this is not from Move, they said that the bullet entered Ramp's body from a, quote, downward angle. What does that mean? Ramp is on the street. Yes. Move is below the street in the basement. If Move shot and killed Ramp, it would have to be an upward move. Now remember, this is the police department saying that it was a downward angle. But it gets even worse or better from your perspective. There's a medical examiner, and Dr. Palmer alluded to him, medical examiner by the name of Dr. Marvin Aronson. And Dr. Marvin Aronson put together a medical examination based on the autopsy. So remember, we got the official police ballistics report saying downward angle, which means Move couldn't have done it. But then you look at what the medical examiner wrote. Let me read a direct quote. Medical examiner Dr. Marvin Aronson testified that the bullet entered Ramp's chest, quote, from in front and coursed horizontally without deviation up or down. Horizontally, that means straight across. So you got the police ballistics report saying that it was a downward angle, which means Move couldn't have done it. You got the medical examiner saying it was horizontal, which means Move couldn't have done it. Well, if Move didn't do it, who did? The answer is there was about 500 to 600 cops out there that day. And many of them were on street level, horizontal, or on the second or third story of neighboring buildings. In addition, when you look at the bullet that killed Ramp, it was a .223 caliber round. And what does that mean? That simply means this is the kind of bullet that's fired from a gun they call a Mini 14. So these Mini 14 guns can use ammo that's .223 caliber. And the police claim that Move had those type of guns inside the basement. And they further claimed in a statement by a spokesperson at the scene that there were no cops who had this Mini 14 type gun which could fire a .223 round. But check this out. The official reports show that, and I got to give credit where credit's due, Lynn Washington, many of us know Lynn, he's one of the greatest journalists in Philadelphia history. And he did some extensive reporting. And this is what Lynn concluded. He found out that first the cops said that there were no police officers with the Mini 14s that could fire a .223 caliber bullet. But Lynn Washington later found out through internal reports from the police department that yes, they did in fact have cops there with that type of gun. So the cops got caught with that. But then the second thing, they found out that not only did they have cops there with that type of gun, but some of them fired that type of gun. So first they said only Move had it. Then they said some cops had it but didn't fire, and then they had to concede that some cops did fire. It gets even worse, but I want to wrap this up because I don't want to spend too much time. In addition to there being some question about the angle, when I say some question from the prosecution side, no question from the defense side, the prosecution had to concede what the ballistics showed and what the medical examiner showed. But it gets even better. There's a guy who used to be the bureau manager of UPI, and UPI is an international news monitoring agency. Guy's name is J. Patrick O'Connor, and he wrote about this. And what this guy, who's part of the system, he's, as I said, a former bureau manager at UPI, this is what he wrote. He wrote that, quote, KYW reporters Richard Maloney and Larry Rosen.
I'm sorry, excuse me 1 minute, Mike. I gotta make this announcement. There's 2 benches that have been brought in. People should make use of them, but any young people, younger people, that have seats, please give them up to the elders. There are people lined up out in the hallway.
Yes.
This is magnificent. We need space.
Listening to Delbert and I was listening to Janine, and they really inspired me because when events like this take place, I'm used to maybe 30, 40 people showing up. But fortunately, we got 10 times that amount. But after hearing Delbert and Janine, I mean, they're like, just keep fighting the fight. Most men and most women will be beaten down. But they're on the phone talking to you like they're from a cell phone from North Philly somewhere. I mean, they really have not gotten beaten down. Let me wrap up what I want to say. I said 5 minutes, I'm going to cut it to 3 minutes, because I certainly want to hear from Leon and definitely from Alta Maddox. Before we took our call break, I was talking about something called Brady material. And Brady is from a case from the U.S. Supreme Court back in 1963. It's called Brady versus Maryland. And basically what it says is this. If the prosecution has evidence against somebody, they have to give that evidence to that somebody. So what does that mean? That means not only can you not hide the evidence as a prosecutor, you can't destroy evidence as a prosecutor. The last thing I was saying is that Delbert after was beaten so viciously, it made the Rodney King beating look like it was a walk in the park. And those who haven't seen it, by the way, it's pretty difficult to watch. It's actually sickening, but just go to YouTube and put in Delbert Africa beating, and it's actually sickening. Imagine somebody being kicked in the face. It's, to me, watching it, I couldn't understand how his head did not get detached from his neck. It was that brutal and that vicious, and how he survived. And you heard him. He still has his wits about him. He's funny, he's smart, he's bright, despite the fact that most people either died or had brain damage from that vicious beating. Let me wrap it up by saying, in connection with that vicious beating, there were actually 4 cops involved, but 3 of them were charged. One was Charles Geist, one was Terrence Mulvihill, and the other was Joseph Sagami. And these cops were on videotape committing the crime. And as Ramona talked about earlier, there was a jury. And before, and Alton and Leon know this well, normally the jury would get the case and deliberate and decide guilty or not guilty. But in rare circumstances, there's something called a directed verdict or a judgment of acquittal. And what that means is, you, as a defense attorney, you say to the judge, hey judge, The case is so weak, there's absolutely no evidence that you shouldn't waste time giving it to the jury to let them decide. The case is just that weak. And the judge in that case agreed and said it is that weak and decided to enter a judgment of acquittal and find the cops not guilty without giving the jury an opportunity to decide. But you know what they say about karma? Karma is not a bitch. Karma is a queen. And when I say karma is a queen, karma does the right thing. And what's the right thing? Let me just read to you what I wrote in Philadelphia Magazine. And remember, you got Charles Geist, you got Terrence Mulvihill, you got Joseph Tagami. And Ramona alluded to this. Even though they were all found not guilty, I write, however, 3 months after his case was thrown out, Geist was shot in the face by his police officer wife with his own gun, fell into a coma, and died 8 months later. It doesn't stop there. I go on to write, and later, on April 29, 1989, Mulvihill used his own service revolver to commit suicide. So having said all that, I'm going to wrap it up by saying this. I'm encouraging people not...
The judge, Stanley Kabaki, does anybody remember that siege on that ship, the Achille Laurel, years ago? Yes, he and his wife was on that ship and got taken hostage. And if I remember correctly, he got beat up pretty bad.
Ramona's like a walking encyclopedia. She knows all the stuff about all these people. It's great that we have standing room only. It's great that people got this righteous indignation, but that's not enough. You got to do something, and there's material being circulated, but I just encourage people to get more information by going to www.onthemove.com. That's easy to remember, onthemove.com, or calling them at 215-386-1165, 215-386-1165. And the final thing I want to say is this. It's so important for us to police the police. And on everybody's smartphone, we all have access to what they call an app. There's an app that allows you to audio tape and videotape all encounters with the police. And not only audio tape and videotape, but even if the cops take your phone and destroy it, it's already on the hard drive of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. So I encourage people to download the app. Let's go to ACLU-NJ app. ACLU-NJ/app. And it's not just audio taping cops and videotaping cops. They have a one-page information sheet that shows you what your rights are. What your rights are when encountered by the police on the street, in the car, in your house. Get that app. It's ACLU-NJ/app. And that's exactly what they did in this case from 1978. But what I want to talk about now is how the Move 9 are clearly not guilty. Even if you're not a lawyer, you know about the presumption of innocence. You know about proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You know burden, you know all of that stuff. Well, look at the evidence that they did not have against the Move 9. One, not one fingerprint of any Move member on any weapon. Not one fingerprint. Number two, no photos and no videos. Remember, you had photographers and TV cameras all out there that day. No photograph and no videotape of Move firing a single shot. Third thing, not one eyewitness among the 600 cops could say that Move member fired the shot. That Move member fired the shot. So no eyewitness evidence. In addition, no ballistics evidence showing that the guns they claimed that the Move 9 had matched the bullet inside the cop's body. That's what we talk about when we lawyers say proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But despite that, Judge Edward Malmed on May 8, 1980, found Move guilty of third-degree murder. And by the way, in 1980, third-degree murder got you a 10 to 20-year sentence. I actually represented guys, drug dealers, who killed people in third-degree murders, polluting the community, killing people. They got 10 to 20, they're back on the street. revolutionaries are still in jail. We also know, before I wrap up, that the judge who tried the case of the Move 9, when a reporter, and I think you heard of this guy's name before, Mumia Abu Jamal, called the radio station. The judge was on a radio show. Mumia called into that radio show and said, "Hey judge, you just found these people guilty. Who did the shooting?" The judge responded, "It's on record, I haven't the faintest idea." That was the judge who said that. And let me wrap this up by talking about Delbert, because in this article I wrote for Philadelphia Magazine, I ended it with what happened to Delbert. We've all seen the beating of Rodney King. If you think that was bad, that was minor league compared to what happened to Delbert. Delbert was beaten and punched and pummeled and thrashed and literally kicked in his head and face. I counted 6 times. Can you imagine a 200-pound cop with these big black boots on kicking somebody in the face 6 times?